Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome to the panel session for the 2022 Vernon User Group Conference. My name is Penny Collins and I'm the lead technical communicator here at Vernon Systems. And our theme this year is accessible collections. Accessibility is the practice of making information, activities, and environments sensible, meaningful, and usable for everyone. How can we attract and retain our diverse audiences to explore our collections? How do we improve access and experience? And what does it mean to be accessible? I'm delighted to introduce our speakers for this panel session. Stace Robertson from Arts Access Aotearoa, who will talk about getting started with accessibility. Tessie Scott from University of Melbourne Medical Museum, who will talk about the online treasure hunt that they held. And Daun from Te Ahu, who will talk about digitising their collection. And I'll finish off with an overview and tips on writing accessible web content.
Kia ora tātou. Thank you very much for having me here this morning. My name is Stace Robertson. I'm an Access, Inclusion and Participation Advisor for Arts Access Aotearoa here in New Zealand. I'm a disabled person. I'm a practicing artist working in ceramics and oil painting, and my role is to support arts organisations and companies to increase their accessibility for deaf and disabled people. So I'm going to be speaking to accessibility from that context today. So Arts Access Aotearoa is an NGO based in Wellington, New Zealand, and our purpose is to increase accessibility for people who experience barriers to participation in the arts. This includes people who have been incarcerated, people with disabilities, and others who experience barriers. And we work across three main networks: the Arts and Corrections Network, the Creative Spaces Program, and Arts for All, which is my area of work. Arts for All is a network of arts organisations and companies from across Aotearoa. It includes festivals, artists, performing arts companies, literary organisations, museums, galleries, venues and producers, as well as deaf and disabled people who are artists and audiences in their own right. And the photo on the screen there is of a recent Arts for All network meeting in Dunedin. The Arts for All network was set up in 2011, and we have 6 regional networks, and we also run virtual support network meetings as well. So for anyone based in Aotearoa who's wanting to increase their accessibility, the Arts for All network is available for you to join. But I'm available on a case-by-case basis to support with accessibility as well. So I'm going to talk briefly about getting started with accessibility. So one of the big things with getting started is identifying what you have. So knowing what in your space is accessible, what is not accessible, and how you can move forward from there. So often when I'm working with a gallery or a museum, a theatre company, whoever it is, one of the first things I'll do is ask them about what they already do, what their space is like, and then we can move forward. So obviously a big thing is physical access, and physical access obviously includes whether someone can get into your space, whether they can move around it comfortably once they're inside, but it also includes environmental things like lighting, sensory elements, seating. Those are all important things to take into consideration. One of the big barriers for people is often finding out what your space is like and knowing what to expect. So we really encourage museums to put clear information about their accessibility on their website, and as much as possible to have it directly from the homepage of your website. It's really important that people can see what your space is like, that they have a clear understanding of what is accessible and also what is not accessible. Sometimes communicating clearly what is not accessible is more important than actually communicating what is accessible. If people know what to expect before they arrive, then they can make an informed decision about how they want to interact with that space. It's also really important to consider how someone gets to your space, whether they can access some information online, and also having a clear and easy way for them to contact you if they have questions. So some museums have access at email addresses, which can be a really helpful way for people to get in contact. But having phone numbers in multiple ways for people to get in touch is really important. Another big thing that we encourage at Arts Access Aotearoa is for organisations to develop accessibility policies and action plans. And this is because often what we see is that it will be an individual in a museum that is driving accessibility because they're passionate about it, because they're connected to disabled people, and not because it's an intentional decision from the museum. And while that can accomplish some really awesome work, it does mean that if that person leaves or their role changes, that accessibility work stops. And when that happens, it leaves the community in the lurch, but it also means that that work is lost, that knowledge is lost from the organisation. So accessibility policies, while it sounds really intimidating, it doesn't have to be, and it's a really great way of making sure that accessibility work is sustainable within a museum. So we have a guide called How to Develop and Write an Accessibility Policy, a guide for arts organisations, which breaks down all the different steps involved in writing a policy to support you with that work. So in addition to some of that foundational work, there's different ways of increasing accessibility that are not necessarily dependent on the physical environment. In a lot of museums, particularly in Aotearoa, are heritage spaces, and so they're not always as physically accessible as they might be, but that doesn't mean that you can't get started. And I've been working with a heritage house here in Wellington that is actually only accessible on the ground floor and not wheelchair accessible at all. So some of the things that they've been focusing on are things that increase accessibility for people who don't necessarily have mobility impairments, but may have low vision, maybe hard of hearing. So although physical access is an obvious place to start, it doesn't have to be the only place to start. You can still increase your outreach to deaf and disabled people in other ways. So I thought I'd just touch on a few different examples there. Obviously, if you're in Australia, it'll be Auslan rather than New Zealand Sign Language, but New Zealand Sign Language information is really important. Not all folks who are deaf are fluent in English, so if you're wanting to welcome deaf visitors into your museum, it's really beneficial to have a video on the website or on a screen as people come in, just explaining the rules of your space, the information they might need to know. Things like parking, public transport, if there's a bag check, all of those things can be really important for people, as well as some of the information about important exhibits and things. Te Papa here in Wellington have a New Zealand Sign Language guide to Te Papa on their website. They have QR codes placed around the museum that you can scan that will bring up New Zealand Sign Language videos explaining some of the exhibit content, which is awesome. You can also do New Zealand Sign Language tours or Auslan tours, and there's been a great example from NGV in Melbourne of deaf-led tours, which is really cool. And that means that they're being led by the deaf community themselves rather than by our interpreters. Audio description and touch tours or sensory tours are really valuable as well, and that is providing access for blind or low vision communities. And that is just providing that extra layer of sensory access, particularly in older museums and things. A lot of the content is reliant on people being able to see the exhibits, to be able to see the written information. So audio description is a way of providing more access to that community, and it can really enrich the experience of going to a museum. Touch tours relate to having tactile elements that people can experience. Often replicas of objects will be made so that people get a different perspective on the exhibit. Accessible interactive elements are really, really important. So thinking about the height of interactive things, how easy they are to use. And one of the really great ways to test that kind of thing is to invite people from the community in when you're doing development to test those things and see if they're going to work for people. Sensory relaxed sessions are becoming increasingly common. And they're really valuable because they provide a low sensory environment for people who are autistic or maybe anxious or have other sensory sensitivities. So opening the museum at a time when it's quieter and welcoming that community in, so they're not being overwhelmed by lots of people, lots of extra noise in addition to the exhibit itself. And also really important, I think, which is often not talked about so much, is the representation of deaf and disabled people. So when it's of course essential to be able to have access to a space, to be able to experience everything there in a way that's equitable to non-disabled visitors, but it's also really important that when you do that, there's stuff that relates to your community, that relates to your experience of the world. And just speaking to my own personal experience, it's very rare that I've gone into a museum and seen anything that relates to disability or to my community. And often what I have found is, related to war and the rehabilitation of soldiers and things like that, which was a really pivotal moment in the history of disability because it signaled a move away from kind of institutionalization of disabled people towards the rehabilitation of disabled people. But our history and culture is so much deeper and broader than that. And I think, wherever there's opportunities for disabled people to be able to see themselves reflected in our history and in our kind of collections and things is really essential, and just really, it also demonstrates to non-disabled people that disabled people are a part of society and that are, should be represented in our spaces. Because often we don't even realize who's missing. So on the screen there is a picture of the front cover of Ngā Toi Mō Te Katoa, or Arts for All, which is a big introductory resource to accessibility in the arts. And it's a great place to start if you're not sure how to get going or what different things you could be doing in your space. And it talks about all different areas of the arts, but there's a lot for museums specifically, and that's available for free to download off the Arts Access Aotearoa website. So you can get in contact with me via afa@artsaccess.org.nz. If you're based in Aotearoa, you can join your region's Arts for All network. And if you happen to be in a region where we don't have a network yet, you're more than welcome to sign up anyway, because we do Zoom sessions which anyone can join from anywhere. And I've got our website and phone number there as well. So if you'd like to get in touch, you'd like to talk through your accessibility work, please do. And thanks again for the opportunity to share today. Kia ora.
All right, so first up, I'd just like to welcome to country. I'm in Victoria, Australia. So I'd like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation as the traditional owners of the land on which we work and create, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. So today I'm going to be taking you through a presentation of the Medical Dentistry Health Sciences Museum's Vernon browser. So the browser was launched on the 18th of July 2022, coinciding with Open Week and the beginning of semester 2 at the University of Melbourne. So today I'll take you through how we created a campaign to launch the new website and its embedded functionality to the student population and increase the accessibility and engagement with the MDHS collections. So first up, a little bit about our collection. There are 3 museums within the Faculty of Dentistry, Medicine, Health and Sciences at the University of Melbourne. We have over 35,000 catalogued objects between them. So medical history sits in 13,756. Henry Foreman Atkinson Dental, which is part of the dental school, 4,456. And we have the Harry Brooks Allen Museum of Anatomy and Pathology at 12,893. So the Faculty of Medicine, Dentistry, Health Sciences Museums collections, which I will abbreviate to MDHS from now on, it encompasses Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander healing practices and the history of teaching, learning and research at the University of Melbourne and health sciences in Australia and internationally. So as I mentioned, we have over 35,000 catalogued items that encompass art, photographs, equipment, objects, artefacts, archives, and biological specimens. So in 2021, MDHS Museums, in collaboration with Vernon Systems, created a new collection browser that linked all the 3 museum collections together on one platform, publishing over 50% of records catalogued in Vernon, about 17,000. So the goal of the collection browser was to create an innovative, centralised, information-rich database of MDHS museum objects. The MDHS collection browser serves as an interactive tool for University of Melbourne staff and students, but also the wider community to search the collection by colour, keyword, name, collection, object type or maker. So they have access to over 17,000 objects, 8,000 images and over 3,000 person profiles, including the makers, artists and significant people associated with the objects in the collection. So for us, the Vernon browser recognises that the collections of MDHS museums are fundamental to the University of Melbourne staff and students in learning, teaching, research and training. The collections are also significant to the history of teaching, learning and research at the University of Melbourne and health sciences. And it ensures the collections are documented, cared for at a high level for future generations and for the benefit not only for the University of Melbourne, but also for the community. So we have a new website. It's got lots of great functionality. How do we promote this to students and encourage them to use the embedded tools? So we engaged with the MDHS communications team to work together to find an answer. So the answer was a social media competition designed to enhance the students' experience of the new museum's website. So this was to be delivered through innovative thinking and utilising new ways of working. The team collaborated on building an engaging competition that would be promoted to students via MDHS and University of Melbourne social media channel. Brendan Marshall from MDHS Comms suggested running a social media competition that gamified the user experience of the website. It was a digital treasure hunt open to all students of the University of Melbourne, loosely based on a campaign run by the UK's Art Fund. So the goal here was to promote the new website and engage students across the university. We really wanted to encourage them to explore the collection through the new website using its enhanced features, filters and functionality, and also to create a sense of fun while showcasing the depth and breadth of the faculty's collections. So really what we wanted to use was colour, museum, favourites, the collections, object type and person. And how are we going to nurture them through this journey and so they could discover all of our collection? So by nurturing the user journey through storytelling, students were engaged through gamification to ensure the primary goal of driving traffic to the website, but also not losing them along the way between platforms. The secondary goal for us was robustly testing the website to prove its build and its function. So where it all started. So in 2020, the UK's Charity Art Fund launched an Instagram competition. It encouraged members of the public to solve clues by exploring museums' past posts on the social media platform. The competition was created by agency Ralph and it aimed to connect people to new museums while they're unable to visit in person during COVID-19 lockdown restrictions. So this initiative followed a survey that was carried out by the charity, which found that 86% of museums and galleries increased their online presence or created new digital content during the COVID-19 pandemic, which I know Vernon noticed a lot of new requests for browsers as well. So our team in the lead up to the launch, we worked together on Zoom. Here are all our smiley faces. We developed a structure that would allow the viewer to experience all of the browser features and connect the users through University of Melbourne's social media platform. So here we have Jackie Healy, who is our Director and Curator of Medical History and Dentistry. We have Rowan, our Curator over here of Harry Brooks Allen Anatomy and Pathology, Brendan from Communications, and myself, the Registrar of the 3 museums. Our team also, we had a lot of people in the background from communications, marketing, and we also had some digital support as well. So the MDHS comms team, where they helped us, they promoted the competition on MDHS and University of Melbourne central social media channels like Twitter and Facebook. They updated all of our banners on our faculty website pages to promote the competition and to give links to enter. Facebook posts were pinned to the top so that anyone going to these social media channels, it was the first thing they would see for the competition week. All of the hard stuff to do with the competition was dealt a lot with the MDHS communications team. So they coordinated the brand with digital teams. They finalised the important logistics nitty-gritties of the T&Cs, which is something really important to think about. They worked on the landing page, the prizes, and the submission mechanics. So what we really had to figure out was, how is it going to work? How do we select a winner? How are entries submitted? What are the legal terms and conditions? So what they ended up doing was building a form to submit to. We randomly selected the correct answer on the day to be fair. And also we went to our department to ask for funding for prizes. That was a big thing, is we wanted a prize they actually wanted to engage with. So I think it was AirPods, some merch and some museum catalogues as third prize. So we decided that the campaign would run for 3 weeks with 3 opportunities to win a prize. So students used daily clues to find objects in the digital collection to advance in the treasure hunt. They then submitted their find at the end of each week for their chance to win a prize. To our delight, they actually gave an answer every day. They were so enthusiastic. They didn't actually wait to the end day. So what I did was I worked with the curators on stories and objects from the collection that would highlight all the 3 museums and important stories within the collection. I then had to plan how the clues and the objects would flow over each day to lead to the next clue. The key for each day was we really wanted to highlight an object and also encourage students to use the functionality of the browser. So what I set up here was like a little plan. So this is the clue. These are the tips I'm going to give them. Down here is the answer. So the answer down here, we want to provide them a brief description and a link to the browser. So basically it was just planning out how it was all going to work. So it ran over 5 days. They were given 2 days. And then on the last day, we announced the winner of week 1 and we launched the next week going there. So we created 3 treasure hunts. They each highlighted unique curatorial stories and objects. So week 1, we had Piltdown Man called Skull or Skullduggery, the Great Anthropology Hoax. Week 2, Dr. Beanie, the Flamboyant Surgeon, Small in Stature, Lived Life Large. And week 3, Forensics, Death Marks, Dentists, and a Deadly Fire. So clues were developed by our team in the museums that would help identify the object and encourage navigation on the website using its functionality. So things I had to consider was what filters of the browser would get them to the clues. We also had to consider there weren't too many clues. We had to try it on mobile phones. So we knew that most of our students would be on a mobile phone. So we didn't want too many results coming up. So we're looking for about, around 40, 50 results and giving them those filters of which museum they were searching, images attached, what the object type was, and we gave them a keyword. So each day, by giving them tips, we encouraged them to use those features of the Vernon browser. And to my delight, they actually found the answer. So so we tested on a mobile, ran through it all, and then we put it over to the communications team and they got someone to try it out as well, just to make sure that it was working as we intended. So each week a new treasure hunts was posted on the MDHS Facebook page. Each day's clues were added to the comments thread with tips to help students find their way. Daily updates to the social media team to the comments provided answers to the previous day clue, and we always were linking back to the browser. We would then provide an image and a brief description of the answer to the day before clue, really encouraging people to get to know our collection. The final answer and winners were announced on Twitter and Facebook. And here's this is our Tinky week 3 answer, final clue, which is a really, really interesting little microscope with a little scene down here. And yeah, so basically the impact was a successfully promoted website we found. Its functionality resulting in 914 competition entries, 53,952 impressions, 2,917 engagements. So we had 4,576,152 sessions on the Melbourne website, which was a 34.8 increase in web traffic over the 3-week period. So how do we measure our results? So we use Google Analytics, which is an option with the Vernon browser. Using Google Analytics, the team were able to report on the success of the campaign's progress and measure audience reach and engagement. So overall, like I said, we could see our traffic was up 34.8%, which was about 1 million more than 22 days prior. It was at its highest in week 2, which was a 36.5 increase to session, compared again to the previous week of 33.4. So yeah, so from their Google Analytics, we could actually see week 2 was our most successful, Tinky week 3, and week 1 was our first week. Understandably, it took them a little while to get into it. We could actually see our results and if they were working. So Google Analytics, this is the screen that I would look at the end of each competition week. From here, we could see the number of sessions. So this is over the 22 days. We could also see the duration that each user would spend on the page. By entering the dates of the competition, the Google Analytics compares the dates to the same period prior. The other great function I could do was I could export this data into Excel doc using the little export function over here on the sessions by period window. And then the exported data, which went into a spreadsheet, allowed us to track the traffic. And then we could create analytical graphs to see how each day, each week was going. So here I've compared the whole 22 days prior to the competition compared to the 22 days of the competition running. So you can see there we had about 1 million. I mean, we're pretty happy with the 3 million that we already had, but another 1 million was pretty good too. So what do we achieve? So what our main aim was to achieve engagement with our students. So here's our 3 of our happy winners from week 1. And I just want to quickly read you just some feedback that we got from our students. So Chrissy said, I enjoyed participating in the competition. I learned how to use the new search tools and I gained so much knowledge from all the questions. Molly, I really enjoyed taking part in the scavenger hunt as it was a fun way to learn a lot more about the Medical History Museum website actually had to offer. I had never used the online gallery before, and it was a great way to see the huge amount of photos and objects within the collections. I love the clue distribution format as a Facebook post. I'd also like to say that the difficulty of the questions was ideal. A few left me thinking for a few hours, but on the whole, none seemed impossible. Thank you for a fun introduction to a cool online collection that I would never have known the University of Melbourne had available to access. Overall, thanks for running this. I love the scavenger hunt and I hope for similar programs in the future. I've just added some little references off the back here, which takes you to our collection, our Facebook page, but also a little bit on the Art Fund campaign as well. So yeah, so overall we found that it was a success for us in engaging people in our collection.
Okay, so to start off with, I'm just going to give you a brief history of our museum. It's kind of relevant because it shows how we've evolved over 50 odd years. The Far North Regional Museum, as it was known back then, was actually started off with a display sort of created by locals who wanted to start having people bring in pieces of history and their treasures. That sort of kick-started the idea of an actual museum. So this original display had just been in a shop window in the main street kind of thing. So once they got the idea to have a museum, they approached the county council because there was nowhere for the museum to go. It would have taken years to be able to get funding together back in those days in order to have this museum up and running. So they approached the county council and they were given the use of Centennial House, which was at the time the library and the public restrooms. Being in a rural area, those restrooms were the pit stop for everyone coming in to do their weekly business and what have you. We're only a small rural town. But this is where the Far North Regional Museum was to take up residence some 20 years later. So jumping forward maybe about another 20 years, they'd set up house. They had to extend it, as you can see, where there was one window, there's now two. But they extended the museum in order especially to be able to make more exhibits, permanent exhibits, and to house what we have is the De Serval anchor, which is the earliest European artifact that we have on site. In fact, it was gifted back to us by Te Papa a couple of years ago in a ceremony. And I do believe its sister sits on the wall in Te Papa as well. So, and they had to actually create a special door just to get the anchor in there. And around the back of that building, they had created, so they had to extend the space and created an off-site storage facility that meant pop-up exhibits could be placed and homed, and also anything that wasn't on display in a permanent exhibit were housed in there so that they could be well cared for. So as time's sort of gone on, what happened was in 2012, Te Ahu Centre was opened. Now that had actually been a community house where they had art exhibitions and theatre and so on and so forth, and it was really just a hub for big events like the AMP shows and what have you. But when they refurbished, they incorporated what was this museum, the Far North Regional Museum, into Te Ahu, and then we were rebranded as Te Ahu Museum. And this is what we're looking at today. Big difference from what had no photos of the old museum on the inside, sorry, but this is what we have today. So what we're doing here, so the collections that had been housed at Pioneer House, they were moved along with the archives over to Te Ahu. So we have the exhibition space where we have Taonga Pākehā, Taonga Croatia, Te Ao Māori, and this is the space where we try and engage, well, we do engage with our schools a lot. The archives held in the back are for on-site storage rather than off-site storage, and all of our archives which are sort of used for the research facilities and so on and so forth. So we hold at least 2 to 3 schools every week in our museum. The programs we run are designed to allow students, regardless of age, to be hands-on with Taonga. So our sort of mission is to make sure that, so we'll bring out artifacts for the kids to actually, wow, what is that? They can actually touch and get an idea of where our artifacts came from, not just pre-colonial, but with the other collections as well. And when they do come in for their programs, we try and make sure that we run their program specific to their learning, so it's relevant whether they're 5 years old or 16. And we have an open door policy, and we receive a lot of visitors to the museum. A lot of those are for research purposes, and that's on a diverse range of subjects. So you might have people coming in wanting to learn about their whakapapa, or the genealogy, or the town clock, was a big one. And it's not just about the archival material, it's about the collections behind them as well. So where you have, you know, founding families and what have you, you've not only got the artifacts that they've brought in, but you've also got the stories behind those artifacts that have been gifted to us. And this is where Vernon's really made such a huge difference in the way that we are able to deliver our collections. So what we had was in 2020, we had begun the process of moving into our digital project, and that's when we sort of started going through our selection process, and we'd had some cataloguing done at that point. We needed to, at that point, just start the quality control on that. And it was fantastic because Vernon made it so possible in order to get through those, sort of making sure that the records that were already online could be corrected and ready to line up with what was going to be the next phase. So the next phase of that started in 2021, and at that stage we were really ready to hit the ground running. But we had obstacles. We had obstacles where we actually had at that stage, my permanent curator had gone on sabbatical for 6 months on another project. And I had another curator come in, which was fantastic. You know, it was awesome. We were able to really pick up the pace then. But we did realise that, I mean, we'd started the photographic side. So the pictures were there ready to link. And we had some of the records which I had to do a lot of correction on. Then one day, my curator said to me, here's some numbers, I'd like you to go and find them. And I said to her, yep, okay. So, yeah, there's me doing the first linking. So what we had was 50 years of documentation, like over 4,000 records. Whew. And none of them were in order. And so I was asked to go and find these records on these items that we had photographed. We had the accession numbers for them. After 2 hours, I'd only found 8 records. We're dealing with 50 years of how they used to do things, not how we do them now, obviously. And we had a space there with COVID. So what had happened was I was shut out. I couldn't do anything. So I literally packed up 50 years of records, put them into my boxes and took them home and sorted them out. But even that wasn't straightforward. We had T numbers, which were temporary numbers. So you can see there on that egg separator accession sheet, it's T450. Okay, so that was the very first kind of accession number they'd ever brought into the museum some 50 years ago. And then we came across what I call the ordinary numbers, where they were just like this one's 1195. So you'd have T1 through to T, I think they stopped at 400, 500, and then they changed it again and they had just number 1 through to like 3,000. And then in 1989, I think it was, they started bringing in what would be kind of more stock standard numbering according to museums. So it was sort of like 89/14/7, sort of the year, which record of the year that was and how many items in that collection. Then there were the textile numbers and the H numbers. H was for Houston collection, but it was also for the heritage collection. So I had to really get through that first. Once I'd done that, using Vernon, I was able to change, sort of add different formats to make it easier for me to be able to do the quality control, do the corrections, so on and so forth, and to bring alive our records. This record in front of you at the moment is really basic. They put nothing into it. But because of what I'm able to do with Vernon now, I can, and you've got to be a bit of a detective, I'm able to really bring these collections to life along with the photographs that we have just had done recently. You'll see here sort of in the 1990s, they started in 1989, but by the 1990s, records became a bit more consistent and they were able to not be so basic anymore, and it's made my job easier in this respect because I don't have to do as much research, although having the records done this well has enabled me, especially because in Vernon, the fields are amazing. I love the fields in Vernon. They're so broad. Your imagination is only limited to the box you're thinking in. It really enables you to evolve and evolve your records, which is one of the biggest things for me with Vernon. Having the limited records and the use of Vernon, I've been able to transform our records so that not only do I have consistency and things are more clear and concise back of house, so to speak, but I mean, that's what's out there now on our microsite. So this is an example of the end result, what I've been able to do from what we've had in terms of our records, the corrections, the learning to use Vernon. And I learn with Vernon every day. It's my baby. It's the first thing that goes on in the morning. And yes, I might get on there on the weekends as well because I just love it, you know. But you evolve with it and it evolves with you. And then you've got these amazing records where you just wouldn't have had that before. And yeah, so that's about it really. It's just the accessibility for now that we have, having implemented Vernon, versus what we were doing 50 years ago or even 2 years ago. We now have collections that we can be proud of. not just a little regional museum, but we're really getting out there now, and that's just very cool. I think that's just about it from me.
So today I'd like to talk to you about accessible web content. I've worked in web for about 15 years. Much of that was in web writing, but I also moved into web management, working with developers and testers. I've learned a lot about accessibility over the years, and so I would like to share with you some guidelines and tips on how you can make your web content more accessible, whether that's your marketing site, your browser site. It's a big topic and it can feel a bit overwhelming, but there are some key things that you can start doing today that will make it easier for people to use your website. So in this presentation, I refer to the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. These guidelines are produced and maintained by the World Wide Web Consortium, also known as W3C, through their Web Accessibility Initiative. So I'll share some practical examples on what makes web content accessible. And at the end, I'll share some resources so that you can continue your learning. So first off, I'd like to take a moment to just think about the web's power. The web can radically change the impact of disability because it removes barriers to communication and interaction that many people face in the physical world. However, when websites, applications, technologies, or tools are badly designed, they can create barriers that exclude people from using the web. Our world is lived increasingly online, and in some cases, the web is the only way to get things done. So it's really important for everyone to have an excellent online experience. Web accessibility means that websites, tools, and technologies are designed and developed so that people with disabilities can use them. More specifically, people can perceive, understand, navigate, and interact with the web, and they can contribute to the web. Web accessibility encompasses all disabilities that affect access to the web, and that includes cognitive, learning, and neurological disabilities, which includes dyslexia, ADHD, and difficulty with memory, problem solving, and comprehension. Visual disabilities, which includes complete or partial blindness, color blindness, and near or far-sightedness. Auditory disabilities, which includes deafness, hearing loss, and ringing in ears. Physical disabilities, which includes muscular weakness, tremors, and lack of coordination. And speech and language disabilities, which include stuttering, loudness or clarity of voice, and reduced vocabulary. Web accessibility also benefits people without disabilities. So for example, people who are using mobile phones, smartwatches, smart TVs, and other devices with small screens and different input modes. Older people with changing abilities due to aging. People with temporary disabilities, such as having a broken arm or lost glasses. People with situational limitations, such as being in bright sunlight or in an environment where they can't listen to audio. And people with a slow internet connection or who have limited or expensive bandwidth. So today we're focused on web content. What do we mean when we say web content? It's many things: text, images, audio, video, files and forms. And there's a theme of text running throughout that. So even within the category of text, there's titles, headings, paragraphs, tables, lists. And then with images, video, and audio, there's alt text, captions, and transcripts. So today we're focusing specifically on writing text. So I've got some tips for you. For each web page, provide a short title that describes the page content and distinguishes it from other pages. Put the unique and most relevant information first. For example, put the name of the page before the name of the organization. Use short headings to group related paragraphs and clearly describe the sections. Good headings provide an outline of the content. Write link text so that it describes the content of the link target or where the link is pointing to. Avoid using ambiguous link text, such as click here or read more. And for files, include the document type and size. For every image, write alternative text that provides the information or function of the image. For purely decorative images, you don't need to write alternative text. For example, images that are only included to make the website more visually attractive. For audio-only content, such as a podcast, provide a transcript. For audio and visual content like videos, also provide captions. Make sure that any instructions and guidance are clear, easy to understand, and avoid unnecessarily technical language. And lastly, use simple language and formatting, write in short, clear sentences and paragraphs, and avoid using unnecessarily complex words and phrases. So I've got a couple of before and after examples to share with you. So this is an example from one of our websites, the eHive Help website. I've made a few changes to it. The page title was a bit obscure, a bit of jargon. It's not really the language that our users would use. I've made it into more plain language. I've added an introduction to make it really clear what the page is about. The headings help to break up the text and group it so it's clearer and easier to scan and read. And the bullet points and bolding also help with scanning and making information stand out. In this example, the heading referred to Boolean operators. That's the correct name, but it's jargon. Boolean searching was developed by the British mathematician George Boole in the 19th century, but most people don't know that, they don't need to know that. I changed it to something a bit more meaningful for our audience. And tables are quite common for presenting content. However, they often don't perform well on mobile. And generally, tables should be used for data, not layout. So a relatively easy fix that you can do on your website today is fix that bad link text. So people with low or no vision can use special software called screen readers to crawl a web page and read aloud the content. People can set the screen reader to only read aloud the links on the page. So not the whole page, just the links. So if all they hear is click here, that's not very helpful. So in the example on the left, if the screen reader was reading only the links on the page, it would say here, read more, click here, download. The person doesn't know what those links are about. It can be quite easy to turn this around as the meaningful words are usually located very close to the offending link text. So in the first example, changing, you can find out our visiting hours here, changing that to find out our visiting hours and putting the link on those words, visiting hours. That is meaningful to somebody. They know what that link is going to take them to. When linking to files, so the example on the bottom right, make sure you include the file type and size. This is especially important for people on mobile devices, as many files don't work well on mobile, for example, PDFs, and people may not want to use up their data, their mobile data, downloading your file. So it helps them to be able to make a decision on whether they want to open that file. Alternative text or alt text is a text substitute for images and other content in web pages. So it's a short description that provides a general sense of the content of an image. Screen readers announce this alt text in the place of images, which helps people with visual or certain cognitive disabilities to perceive the content and function of the images. Alt text is something to read up on, as there's a lot of different examples out there depending on the situation. And that leads into my last slide about resources. So I recommend you explore this list. There's a free digital accessibility course, and the Cooper Hewitt website, which is the last link there, goes into a lot of detail about alt text and image descriptions in the context of museums and galleries. So you're getting that specific to the industry advice rather than general advice on alt text. There's also a link there for how people with disabilities use the web. It's really excellent. It illustrates issues that people face and how they interact with websites and what makes their lives easier. So something for you to think about. Does your website help people, or does it make their lives difficult? Make your website more accessible for everybody, and you'll make the world a better place. I would just like to start by asking Stace, how do you apply accessibility principles and guidelines to really grassroots levels? So for those really small organizations, what's something that they can get started on when they don't have a lot of funding or resource?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think that's where I would be looking at what your space is like, what you do and don't have, and how you can communicate that with people. So it's not necessarily requiring you to change anything, but it's just about communicating that experience really clearly for people. If anyone's interested in examples, a really good one I found is the Welcome Collection in the UK. Have really good access information on their website. And obviously that's a very big institution, but I think the kind of approach they've taken could be applied. If you can take photos and you can create some information on your website.
What has been your most satisfying visit to a museum or gallery, or are there any real standout institutions?
Oh, that's a big question. One that I always really appreciate going to is the Otago Museum and Index do an exhibition together. I'm not sure if it's biannually or if it's just been interrupted because of COVID, but it's a partnership between Index, which is an autistic artists group from Aotearoa, and Otago Museum, and Otago Museum supports an exhibition in their space, which is very much led by the artists, and the Otago Museum's team offer curatorial and install support. And I always really love that as an example of public programming that represents disabled people and gives them space to speak to their own experiences. I was also at ACME in Melbourne recently and really appreciated on their digital screens. They have the function to be able to increase text to large print size, which I thought was awesome. I hadn't seen that here in Aotearoa.
Tessie, do you think that the museum collection has changed students' perspectives as they go through their studies?
Well, our collections are there to educate and enhance the students' experience. So what the browser does for us is really allows the access. It's also there for academics and researchers as well. We've found that the Vernon browser is just a really, fantastic, easy tool that they can first have an entry point as an experience as a student or as a staff member. They then from there contact us if they'd like to physically engage with an object, or as a researcher. We do have the comments function as well, where we've had a lot of general public commenting that they have a similar object, that they have a medal from the same, AMA conference, or I have a same X-ray machine from the 1920s. Do you want to see a picture? So it's really a great interactive tool, not just for the students, which the primary goal is. It is our collection is there, a collection from professors, from the faculty, from donations from the community for engagement with our students, but also as a wider community as well.
The treasure hunt was focused on current students, But do you think that that activity has helped to attract future students to study at the university? I mean, it was on social media, it was visible to a lot of people on your website homepage. Have you sort of had any feedback through marketing teams or whatever about the success of that in attracting future students?
Well, it was deliberately launched during O Week, which is the University of Melbourne's Open Week. We had over 42,000 people turn up in person to our O Week. The competition wasn't open to students that worked within the university. So with our terms and conditions, we really needed to have quite a strict guidelines that everyone was able to engage in it, but the prizes were only for current students. We were I haven't had any feedback on outside the museum channel, but for us, like, we were quite impressed that we had a pretty good traffic before the competition, something that we didn't realise until we really looked at the Google Analytics. You know, for us, like, bumping it up, 34% was great, but that wasn't the end goal. The end goal was, how do we launch this so it's fun, so people know it exists, so people engage with it, know all the functionality. Yeah, like, yeah, for us, that was a success. Like, the students really enjoyed it. And for me, they solved the clues, which was a bonus. It's good because I was guinea pig number one. Yeah, then when we threw it out to other people, I was a bit nervous. But I think, yeah, at first we didn't have the tips. And that's something that I realised, that we just needed to guide them a little bit, like how, if you use these tips, it really brought down those numbers to a good 50 or so that they could select from. But the other thing I'd say is, it was a pretty simple idea. And even though we had a communications team behind us, a smaller organisation could easily do this. If you have a browser, if you have a Facebook page and an Instagram page, it actually, yeah, I think it could benefit smaller and larger organisations. The main thing I would say is really sit down and work out how it's going to work and the terms and conditions, because that's something that's really important when it comes to competitions as well.
Mary, what has the community reception been since you started digitising and making your collections available in the way that you have?
It's just been extraordinary. We've gone from sort of, I mean, a lot of people don't even know where we are. I have so many people. I mean, we're literally in the cubby hole around the corner of the main desk, kind of thing. And a lot of people say, "Hey, we didn't even realise I've never been to the museum before. Has it always been here?" and what have you. And now, and between the push that my curator does via Facebook and word of mouth, people are seeing those collections, spreading the word, and our numbers have just, like, wow, skyrocketed really comparatively. I mean, yeah, you've got the COVID thing, but our numbers have jumped sort of from, we'd have maybe 2,500 visitors a month to nearly 5,000. With our clients coming on, or our patrons coming in, they are, I mean, that's another thing with Vernon, is that it's not just based on what's out there in the exhibition space. We'll actually have clients come to us and say, "Can you tell me more about that?" And I'll sit there and go, boom, here we go. Here's the information behind it. And that also helps with their researching, and it's brought in a lot more researchers as well. So it's been really good. And like I said, it has exploded.
Have there been any additional challenges being far away from New Zealand's main city centres?
I think, how do I put this? Like, for myself, and a challenge is that, like, everything that I do in regards to our collections and uploading the records and so on and so forth, it's wonderful, and I've had huge support with Vernon, but I want to come to you guys, you know what I'm saying? Like, we don't have available what other people have in larger centres, so everything's web-based or meetings online, and so that's a challenge in itself, rather than being there to do the practical in-house, if you know what I mean. But there's also not having the research facilities. A lot of the stuff I research, I would be better off being able to pop down the road to Auckland Museum, take a good look, or have a famil in the back of those museums. We just don't have that up here. So what I'm doing, I suppose, essentially in saying that is trying to create it so we don't have so many challenges in the future around that, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Yeah. So that we don't have the challenges about being just a little rural town, which is an amazing little rural town. Everyone should come here.